The ballroom shimmered under the weight of crystal chandeliers. Laughter echoed from velvet-covered walls, glasses clinked, and the scent of overpriced perfume floated through the air. It was the 40th anniversary gala of the Albright Institute for Civic Leadership. Political giants, academic elites, corporate sponsors. Everyone who mattered was there. Everyone except the people they once called failures. I stood at the far edge of the hall, just beyond the last linen-covered table, hands folded gently in front of me. My black suit absorbed the light, making me nearly invisible. That was fine. I had learned to listen better in the shadows. Near the front of the room, a table shimmered with gold-rimmed wineglasses and laughter that cut like glass. My mother sat there, flawless in a deep burgundy gown, her silver necklace catching the light. Her voice rang louder than necessary, polished and confident, made to be overheard. She leaned closer to the woman beside her and said with a theatrical sigh, "She dropped out her first year. Honestly, it is still a family embarrassment." The woman gave a sympathetic smile. My mother continued, chin raised, as if trying to rewrite the air around her. "If she shows up tonight, just know we only gave her a ticket out of pity. She never amounted to anything." Laughter rippled again. None of them noticed me standing not 20 feet away. None of them knew what was coming. Because tonight, in this room of applause and pedigrees, the person they dismissed was about to walk onto the stage as the keynote speaker of the night. And not even my mother would be able to laugh through what came next. My name is Harper Elridge. I am 34 years old. I stand 5 feet 9, lean with long limbs shaped more by late-night walks and stubborn endurance than gym routines. My hair is dark chestnut, tied into a low knot at the nape of my neck. I do not wear makeup. I have never cared for glitter. My only accessory is a small pin on my lapel shaped like a flame. It represents the Ethics Council, the youngest chairwoman in its history. But no one here knows that yet. Not even my family. I walk with quiet steps, not because I am afraid, but because I have been taught to listen before speaking. For most of my life, I was not the kind of daughter my family knew what to do with. My mother is Elizabeth Elridge, a former television education advocate, now a full-time fundraiser and socialite with sharp pearls and even sharper opinions. My older sister Rachel has a Juris Doctor degree and a condo in Georgetown. Her husband, Mark, used to be a junior advisor for a senator. At family dinners, they recite their LinkedIn bios like scripture. And then there was me. I never cared for hierarchy. I asked too many questions, challenged rules that did not make sense. In my freshman year at Belmere University, I published an exposé on the school's illegal surveillance of dorm rooms. It went viral. The administration expelled me for breaching institutional privacy. My mother begged me to retract. I refused. She told me I had humiliated the family and warned me not to return home unless I was ready to act like a woman who understands legacy. For years, I did not go back. I lived in borrowed spaces, slept in the backseat of my friend's car during one November. I worked late shifts at diners, transcribed interviews for grad students, read research papers under flickering fluorescent lights in public libraries. I began writing freelance ethics columns online, drawing attention from small think tanks. I never stopped learning. Eventually, a quiet fellowship turned into a grant, a research paper caught attention, and one quiet morning, I got the call. 6 years later, I was named chair of the National Ethics Council, the youngest in its 72-year history. But my family never asked. They never called. They did not even know I was in Washington. Until tonight. The invitation arrived not through my family, but through the Office of Civic Legacy itself. The Albright Institute had invited me to deliver the keynote at their 40th anniversary gala. Theme: The Quiet Architects of Integrity. When I saw the name of the event, I almost smiled. Almost. I did not RSVP right away. I stared at the email for 2 days, rereading every line, especially the sentence that said, "We are honored to highlight your work at the intersection of ethics and emerging technology." It was not pride that made me accept. It was clarity. The evening of the gala, I arrived early. The National Capitol Ballroom was carved from marble and soaked in soft gold light. Servers moved like shadows between tables, setting napkins into perfect folds. I wore a black fitted suit, clean lines, no frill, with a single dark notebook in my hand. I asked the coordinator for my seating. He pointed toward the very last table near the emergency exit. I thanked him. As guests poured in, the room grew loud with practiced conversation. At the center of it all was my family. They had been invited through Rachel's firm, as donors and alumni. My mother floated between groups, air-kissing senators' wives and laughing too loudly at half-funny stories. Rachel, as always, was polished perfection in an emerald dress and heels meant to command attention. Mark wore a pocket square that matched her earrings. They did not notice me. But I noticed them. My mother gestured toward the entrance, her voice as clipped and performative as ever. Honestly, Harper might come. You remember her, right? The writer who turned her dropout into a hobby. She always had opinions, never results. The group chuckled politely. I stood still, hands folded behind my back. I thought of the night I was expelled. She had come to the campus in a rage, not to defend me, but to scold me. Her exact words were, "I cannot believe you would choose scandal over structure." After that, silence. For years. Tonight was no different. I watched them pose for photos, sip wine, glow in the attention of others. They belonged to a world of appearances, and I had long accepted that I did not. My place card sat at a neglected table. No flowers, no centerpiece, just a napkin and an untouched glass of water. I took my seat without complaint. I was not here for decorations. Minutes passed. The gala began. A hush swept the room as the host took the stage, his voice warm and trained. He introduced early honorees, a philanthropist, a retired Supreme Court clerk, a documentary filmmaker. I clapped when appropriate, smiled when cameras turned. Then he said, "And now, the moment many of you have waited for. Our keynote speaker tonight is a person whose journey has not followed the expected path. But perhaps that is exactly why it matters." The room quieted. The speaker continued. She has challenged systems, redefined standards, and reminded us all that truth rarely speaks from the center. I felt it. The air shifted. My mother lowered her glass. Rachel furrowed her brow. Mark glanced around. The speaker smiled. "Please join me in welcoming Chairwoman of the National Ethics Council, Ms. Harper Elridge." Silence, sudden and absolute. I stood. My heels clicked once, twice, across the marble. Heads turned. Mouths opened. I passed their table. My mother blinked, lips slightly parted. Rachel's hand froze mid-adjustment of her necklace. Mark looked straight at me, then quickly down. No one spoke. No one clapped. Not at first. Then, like a rising wave, the applause began. Scattered. Then steady. Then full. I walked toward the stage with measured pace. My heart was still. This was not revenge. This was reckoning. And not even they could deny the truth now. I reached the stage and took the podium without hesitation. The spotlight was warm against my face. I placed my notebook to the side, but I had no intention of reading from it. I looked out over the room. Hundreds of faces, some familiar from headlines, others only known through the way they smiled or whispered. I found their table. They sat frozen. My mother's hand gripped the stem of her glass. Rachel stared with a fixed expression. Mark fidgeted with his cufflinks. I let the silence hang. Then I spoke. "Good evening." My voice was steady. "I am honored to be here tonight, not because I was always expected to be, but because I wasn't." A few heads tilted, intrigued. I come from a family where expectations were not just high, they were absolute. I grew up hearing that structure is success and that deviation is disgrace. So when I questioned my university's policies as a freshman and was expelled for it, I did not just lose my education. I lost my place at the table. The air thickened. My voice did not rise, but it carried. I lived in borrowed rooms. I worked in silence. I studied by flashlight, read legal texts meant for experts. Taught myself bioethics and digital policy not because anyone told me I could, but because I could not stand to let truth be flattened. Someone near the front nodded. I kept going. For years, I worked under different names. I ghost wrote, I reviewed papers for institutions that never knew who I was. Until one day, a single article under my own name caught attention. It was about invisible decisions made by algorithms. About how we surrender control not with force but convenience. That article became a lecture. The lecture became a panel. The panel became a fellowship. And the fellowship became the reason I stand here tonight. I paused. My fingers rested lightly on the edge of the podium. I glanced once toward their table. Still unmoving, still small, still silent. I let the words settle, then continued. I am not here to shame those who could not see me. Visibility is a strange thing. Some people see only what they fear. Others see only what they expect. I was neither, and that was why they never looked close enough. A hush settled over the room. I spoke of the work I do now. The ethical implications of machine learning. The ways we must legislate conscience into things we cannot feel. I spoke not in jargon, but in stories. Of a mother denied healthcare by an algorithm. Of a student expelled by a bot that flagged his paper as plagiarized when it wasn't. Of a man fired by a system that never learned nuance. By the time I finished, the room was still. Not quiet with disinterest, but with something else. Respect. Wait. A kind of listening that does not fade when the lights dim. I thanked them. I stepped back. And then, as if on cue, someone rose. A man in uniform. Silver-haired. Sharp-eyed. General Raphael alluring. Decorated. Revered. He stepped forward, offered me a salute. Then spoke into the mic. This woman represents the future of leadership in this country. Not loud, not performative, but principled. He turned to me. Thank you for carrying the kind of strength most people will never recognize until it saves them. The applause returned. This time different. Not ceremonial, not polite, but grounded. I stepped off the stage. Not triumphant, just whole. As I passed my family's table again, my mother opened her mouth, then closed it. Rachel turned away. Mark lowered his gaze. They did not stand. They did not smile. They did not matter. Because tonight, for the first time, I realized I did not need them to see me. I had already been seen. After the applause faded and the lights softened, I returned to my table near the exit. No one followed. That was how I preferred it. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, letting the warmth of the moment linger but not control me. I had not given that speech for validation. I had given it to mark a boundary between who I had been and who I had become. The buzz in the room shifted. Servers moved again. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter now, more deliberate. I watched the ripple effect begin. Faces turned in my direction with new awareness. A few guests made their way toward me. A dean from Columbia, a senator's chief of staff, a researcher from MIT. They spoke with softness, curiosity, and a kind of reverence I was not used to. I answered politely, shared brief words, never too much. I knew how this worked. People did not just hear stories. They stored them, folded them into their own agendas. Still, I appreciated the ones who simply said thank you and meant it. Across the room, my family remained seated in place. They had moved slightly closer to the stage. Perhaps to be seen, perhaps to pretend connection. But none of them had approached me. That, too, I had expected. They were architects of illusion. To acknowledge me now would be to admit everything they denied for years. My mother kept her chin high. She spoke animatedly to someone seated beside her, but I saw the flicker in her eyes. The questions she could not ask aloud. I saw my sister stealing glances toward me, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. And Mark. He barely moved. His face was a canvas of confusion, the kind that only comes when the world you built no longer obeys your rules. I let them sit in it. I owed them nothing. When the event drew to a close, I did not rush to leave. I waited, watched as people filtered out. Smiles exchanged, contacts collected, shoes clicking against polished floor. No one spoke to my family. No one asked for their opinion. No one turned their cameras toward them. They were shadows now, and I had not raised a single voice to make it happen. I had simply shown up and let the truth exist. Later that night, after the gala, I walked alone along Constitution Avenue. The air was cold, crisp. My heels echoed against the pavement in rhythm with the thoughts in my head. I passed the Lincoln Memorial and paused at the reflecting pool. My own image looked back at me, sharp, composed, whole. I took out my phone. Dozens of missed calls, messages, mentions. Someone had uploaded the speech. Within an hour, it had gone viral. Quiet strength, they called it. The speech that humbled the room. I did not read all the messages. I only saved one. It came from an unknown number. I don't know if you remember me, but I was a student at Belmere the year you were expelled. Your article saved me from losing my scholarship. I never got to say thank you. I watched you tonight, and I cried, because you were right all along. I read it twice, then turned off my phone. At home, my apartment was quiet. Books lined the walls. A small tea kettle sat beside a clay mug. The flame pin still rested on my lapel. I did not remove it. I poured tea and stood by the window. Across the city, buildings glowed, but none brighter than the steady peace inside my chest. They had laughed, mocked, erased me, and still, I rose. Not for them, not for revenge, but because I refused to disappear. The days that followed were a blur of quiet attention. Journalists requested interviews. News anchors mentioned my name alongside words like poise and integrity. Think tanks cited my research more frequently. Invitations arrived from places that once ignored me. I accepted none. I returned to my work. I adjusted lesson plans for a virtual ethics course I taught weekly to students in underserved schools. I answered messages from young researchers, mostly women, asking if they were still allowed to dream big after being told they were too much, too loud, too complicated. I told them yes, quietly, firmly. My family did not call. Until the fourth day, an email arrived, from my mother. The subject line read simply, "I was wrong." The message was 2 sentences. "I didn't know what you had become. I see now that I never truly knew who you were." No apology, no warmth, just a brittle sentence wrapped in years of absence. I closed the message, did not reply. A week later, my sister sent a LinkedIn request, followed by a message. "Our firm is looking into AI policy compliance. We were wondering if you could advise. Your work is brilliant." I read it twice, then replied with a single link. "Here is a public version of my latest white paper. Everything I believe is already written." I signed it simply, Harper. No title, no invitation to reconnect. I was not angry, not anymore. I had simply evolved past the version of myself that needed them to understand. They had always played a game of performance. I no longer auditioned. The most powerful response is often silence. Not out of fear, but from knowing you have already said everything that needed saying, once, and with truth. I did not need to retaliate. My presence had done that for me. I did not need revenge. The world had simply watched as they became irrelevant in the shadow of a story they could no longer rewrite. They had mocked me, dismissed me, forgotten me, and then watched the world remember me louder than they ever could. And I had done nothing except tell the truth. It has been months since the night of the gala. The headlines have faded. The social media noise has quieted. The world, as it always does, has moved on. But I have not. I carry that night with me not because it changed my life, but because it reminded me that I had already changed long before anyone noticed. Some mornings, I take long walks along the river with a thermos of black coffee. I pass by early joggers, dog walkers, delivery cyclists. No one recognizes me. I am grateful for that. Recognition is fleeting, but clarity stays. My routine is simple. I teach, I write, I mentor. I still sit on the ethics council, but I no longer attend every public forum. I choose instead to create space for younger voices. Ones that were once like mine, uninvited, unpolished, powerful. I volunteer twice a week at a community tech hub, teaching children about the values behind data, the decisions that shape their futures. Most of them do not know my name. That, too, is exactly right. They do not need to know it to feel its impact. I once believed belonging had to be given. That it was earned through approval, applause, a seat at someone else's table. But I learned that belonging is not permission. It is presence. It is the quiet decision to exist fully and refuse to apologize for it. Sometimes I think about my mother. Her voice echoing in that ballroom. Her certainty. Her dismissal. I do not hate her. I do not wish her pain. But I no longer carry her words as truth. They are artifacts now, remnants of a past that shaped me but no longer defines me. I think about my sister, too, and the way she tried to reconnect, not with humility, but with strategy. I hope one day she realizes the difference. I hope one day she reaches out not with a request, but with a question. Until then, I remain a chapter she cannot skim. And I think about the girl I used to be. The one who slept in her friend's car, who read ethics papers by lamplight in a public library, who was told she had thrown her future away over one article. That girl didn't fail. She became. To anyone who has ever been mocked, sidelined, erased, I want you to know something simple and steady. You are not broken. You are not behind. You are not defined by the silence of others. You are a story still unfolding. And the most powerful chapters often begin in the margins. You do not need to shout to be heard. You do not need to be seen to matter. You do not need a title to lead. What you need is this, a quiet belief that who you are, even when unseen, even when dismissed, is already enough. So walk forward, even when the road is narrow, even when your steps are slow, even when no one claps. Because dignity is not performance. It is endurance. And sometimes, the people who laughed at your silence will one day fall silent at your strength. That is not vengeance. That is arrival. That is you, choosing to become exactly who you were always meant to be, without permission. And when that moment comes, you will not need to raise your voice. You will only need to stand.